This video was supposed to come out around Three Houses' 5th anniversary. That didn't happen. Does Fire Emblem Three Houses even need an introduction? Is anyone who hasn't played this game gonna watch this? I mean, you can. I watch videos about things I don't know crap about all the time. And if that's you, here's the gist. Fire Emblem Three Houses is the 16th mainline Fire Emblem game. It came out on Switch 6 years ago, and got a lot of acclaim from audiences and critics alike at the time. Despite what you might think from the title, there's 4 story routes, actually, complex world building, and many, many characters. As someone whose life was ruined by this game ever since I first played it 5 years ago, I have witnessed pretty much any schmo on the internet have an opinion on it. From what I've seen, though, regardless of how people feel about the game as a whole, people tend to praise one thing the most, which is the cast. The depth of character writing in this game goes so inexplicably hard, and is so consistently well handled for a cast this large. I found myself going into dumb tangents about my takes on pretty much every character in this game, and so I wanted to show my appreciation for one of my favorite games ever made by talking about those silly guys. Welcome to the Dream Lab, Fire Emblem fans! We're ranking every playable character, plus a few extras, in Fire Emblem Three Houses. Before we get started, I just want to... Daisy? Before we get started, I just want to make some disclaimers. They're pretty much just for clarity's sake, but I recommend you listen to them anyway. Hear ye, here are the disclaimers and rules, I guess. 1. Spoilers. 2. This is Three Houses content only. Nothing from Three Hopes to see here. Mainly because I don't know how I should talk about Three Hopes in relation to Three Houses yet. Maybe I'll figure that out in another video. 3. I am by no means a professional writer, especially for video games. I have a bit of experience in writing, but in many ways I am still a mere student. My opinions do not take authority over others, especially yours. And I'm going to do this with nothing but respect for the team behind this game, especially since development involves some of the dreaded crunch. That's not to say I'm not going to do any critique, that will happen, but take it with a grain of salt each time. 4. This game is dense. I am very likely to miss something. For reference, I looked over each scene, support, and piece of monastery dialogue from the major characters. I skipped the Goddess Tower and S support scenes because I don't think the game expects the player to see all of those. I see them more as fun bonuses. Besides, I've only seen like one each because I'm a believer in monogamy. Anyway, point is, there's a ton of content in this game, and if I miss something, let me know. Thank you. 5. My opinions are not a monolith. I have been inspired by many other YouTubers' excellent video essays, some of which really help me understand a certain character better. I want to give them the credit they deserve during certain entries on this list where their take on a character really opened my eyes in some way. Last thing I'll mention is you might be wondering what I'm basing these rankings on. Well, for one, their performance as a unit does not matter to me. I may have the piss screen, but I'm no gameplay expert by any means. This is just about how the characters are written. For my analysis, it works on a very concept versus execution basis, instead of a good versus bad one. What was the intention behind this character, and was that intention realized? I like it because it allows me to engage with the creators as people with assumed intentionality behind every decision, even if that's not always the case. I believe that characters like the ones in Three Houses are created for the players to care about, and some characters are going to naturally speak to people more than others because each person's life experiences are unique and all that. I just don't understand the internet's perception that critique has to be 100% objective when that just doesn't exist, and seems to be denying a huge part about experiencing stories in general. So if a character makes me feel warm and fuzzy inside, they might end up higher on the list. With all that out of the way, let's get to the only character I do not care about at all.
I see the future, and it's gold!
Anna is kind of a non-character in this game. She has no supports, no connection to anything in the main story, nothing. That alone means that there's no way she can be anything other than absolute dead last to me. The only time she gets the weeest bit of characterization is when she makes appearances in other people's supports or in her paralogue. Even then, the only characterization you get is that she's a merchant and has good morals. Crazy. It's really a shame 3 Houses was my first Fire Emblem game. If you weren't able to tell, it'll become really obvious really quick. And this is not a great introduction to a character who's apparently an iconic staple of the series. Sad.
Got him!
Bernadetta is a character that people seem to feel very strongly about. People either really love her or really hate her. I'm not in either category. I'll start by saying that I don't hate her. Anna's the only character that I truly do not care about. Everyone else has shining moments or interesting aspects about them, and that includes Bernadetta. The moments I think where her character is the most compelling are the ones where her fears, passions, and trauma are taken seriously. I am actively engaged in learning about the really dark baggage she carries around, or how even though she's afraid of people, she still yearns for friendship. The problem lies is that she's not written like that most of the time. She is like my dog, but not as epic. And less funny. The best way I can describe it is that she flip-flops between being a character who struggles to deal with the anxious voice in her head and being a personification of the anxious voice in your head. And it's a personification that's mainly used for comedy. I'm not saying that characters can't both be used for comedy and drama. As someone who struggled with anxiety in the past, I've had irrational thoughts that are absolutely ridiculous. I personally think, though, that Bernadetta's comedy would land better for me if it was a more toned down, more sympathetic approach. Have the humor have a little more of a #relatable spin to it. As is, the way Bernadetta acts is so exaggerated that I feel I'm supposed to be laughing at Bernadetta for being strange and bad at conversation, which starts to feel very odd to do once you know her habits come from a very serious place. It also doesn't help that Bernadetta's shenanigans tend to play out the same way every time. The bit can be funny at times, but I find it's used way too much, especially in A supports when I expect her tendency to be presumptuous to be dulled down somewhat. The repeated bit just reminds me that we could have been spending time exploring her in other ways. It feels like there's a disinterest in exploring Bernadetta holistically. I think it's telling that she remains an anxious recluse in most of her paired endings instead of growing away from that. Which sucks because I want to care about her. Moments like her growth in her Raphael support and her vulnerable moments with Dorothea are some really satisfying emotional highs. Some of my favorite moments in this game even. But I find she was one of the only characters whose supports I sometimes dreaded having to watch for this video. So yeah, this flip-flopping with her character is ultimately why she's so low on the list. It's just something that really bothered me.
Now you'll learn!
One thing I've noticed from watching other ranking videos for this game is that the faculty characters tend to land lower on the list than the students do. I think there's a couple reasons why. For one, the faculty characters can feel sometimes like they are supporting characters to the other supporting characters, that being the students. Most of them are adults who have got themselves figured out. They don't need to go on a journey of self-actualization or improvement or battle any internal struggles to the extent that the students usually do. Instead, the faculty characters end up passing on their knowledge to a younger generation and supporting them through their growth. Alois plays out that role the least in my opinion. Of course, there are other things a faculty character can be, but then you get into the other problem the faculty face. Limited screen time. Each of the students appear in multiple cutscenes, which gives them an opportunity to say or do something interesting in those cutscenes. And the faculty just get less of that. Alois has his big moment at the very beginning of the game by being the character who knows Geralt and can convince him to go back to the monastery. It's a role needed to get the plot going, sure, but it feels so small in the grand scheme of things. It's too bad because I do like the fun uncle vibes he brings to a lot of his interactions. And I like how his goofiness is balanced by his humongous amount of guilt over taking life, which affects him to the point of being deathly afraid of vengeful ghosts. It gives an otherwise very lighthearted character a more serious twist to him, which helps him blend in more naturally with the rest of the cast. You could say that he's a little bit of a My script just says, insert bad pun here.
I live.
It reads as fine. One thing that immediately holds the guy back is the few supports that he gets. I understand why this is the case, since he's only playable post-time skip on the route that has the shortest time skip. But it still makes it so that his character doesn't get to explore as many scenarios and dynamics as most other characters get to do. It would have been nice to see more opportunities to showcase what differentiates Yuritsa as his own person separate from the Death Knight. Think the more casual support he has with Bernie. I am genuinely invested in his relationship with Mercedes, and when you understand him more, it makes his deaths more tragic. In 3 out of 4 routes, there really is no saving the guy. He lives and dies a tragic life, which does evoke the old pathos. In some ways, though, he feels more there to flesh out Mercedes' character than be his own.
The Blade Breaker's Wrath.
Gerald's character accomplishes a couple of things within the story. The obvious one is that he needs to die in order to showcase Byleth's growth. The other is to prod the viewer to ask questions and to engage with the mysteries that the game has set up for you. Best example is how his distrust of Rhea is the first sign that the church might be up to something. That being said, my issue with him is that all of his most interesting traits have to be entirely told to us by other characters instead of using some of the little screen time he gets to really showcase that. For example, characters love talking about how much Geralt cared for Byleth, but there's not a scene with him and Byleth one-on-one that really hammers that point home for me. Maybe the game could have benefited from a scene where Byleth gets to share a personal memory about Geralt, even if it's a small one. But that's more of a Byleth problem. I'm just not as invested in the character that I feel like the game wants me to be. So when he dies, I get why Byleth is upset, mainly because, that's their dad. But I, the player, haven't really been given the time to connect with him as well. If anything, the plot keeps finding ways for Geralt and Byleth to not interact by having him always be busy doing other stuff. It's to prevent certain mysteries from unfolding too quickly, but it unfortunately sacrifices some needed father-child screen time to do that. So you're left with a dad character who sounds really fun and unconventional in theory.
Aha! A weak point!
As I mentioned before, I rewatched every single support to prepare for this video. I did it just because I like being thorough. Smiley face. And Hanneman is a character that really benefited from that because Hanneman's backstory only gets fully laid out in a single support. But man, does it explain a lot about the guy. The story he tells to Edelgard about how his sister was exploited by a noble family in their effort to get their hands on a child with a crest really makes you feel for him and understand his resolve to prevent situations like that from happening ever again. Like, when Hanneman says that his sister, quote, was inflicted by a disease of the heart and died young, my heart just drops at the implications of what that statement means. It's interesting also how he has this genuine hatred for the crest system while also having a genuine fascination with the science behind crests themselves. I honestly think there could have been more explored with that contrast, potentially. Hanneman is pretty solidly written when it comes to cohesion between backstory and actions. However, he's low on the list for a couple of reasons. For one, I'm just personally attached to most other characters more. And though the reasons for his actions are sympathetic, he still isn't written to really grapple with something internally or overcome a significant flaw. That's not inherently a writing flaw, not every character has to be dynamic, but I just prefer when they are, because there's more to talk about with a character when they get to change.
Oh my. What could have brought you here?
Sothis has this similar problem to Geralt, where scenes could have been tweaked to provide more opportunities to get you to care about her relationship with Byleth before she disappears. Sothis ends up higher though, because she does get more time to interact with Byleth overall. There's even some hints of a dynamic between the two, with her being prone to tease Byleth and make snarky comments about the plot, and being the first character to get Byleth's usual stone face to crack. I always liked how she was always encouraging Byleth to be their own person and have their own agency over their own life. It's an interesting contrast to someone like Rhea, who has a very specific destiny lined up for Byleth. Ironic.
Ba-boom!
Raphael is generally seen as one of the weaker student characters in this game, and I can see why, even though I do personally find him to be pretty likable. Silly himbo man. The main reason is that, unlike most characters, he has actually processed his grief and baggage and doesn't let things from the past negatively affect his actions or mindset in the present. I hope you know that I'm making wild gestures, even though you can't see it. An example of this is at the end of his paralogue with Ignatz, where there's this possibility of Count Gloucester being the one who inadvertently caused Raphael's parents to get killed. When Ignatz questions if Lorenz might have known anything about this, Raphael immediately shoots it down. Raphael doesn't need the closure of finding out who truly killed his parents. He already found that closure, and grief is not going to cause him to distrust a friend based on some mere speculation. Raphael has lost his parents, and his family's wealth, mind you, but he wants nothing more than to focus on how he can support his sister in the present. He actually is a nice change of pace amidst the sea of characters who are just going through it. I kinda wish this contrast was utilized a bit more, TBH. It mainly plays out by Raphael offering advice that seems overly simple and obvious, but frequently ends up being something that his support partners need to hear anyway. And I like that. It's realistic. Because when people are stuck in their own head, they can lose sight of the most obvious solution to their problems. You overcomplicate things. I like how Raphael's commitment to being a bro is able to push people in the right direction. Thank you, himbo man. Salute the troops.
Flame spirit, protect me.
When I was finalizing my rankings for this list, I wasn't expecting Petra to land pretty low on the list, since I do find her pretty likable. I suppose maybe you could say that about most characters, though. Her desire to learn about Fodlan and teach about Bridget especially is very charming. Petra, like most characters in this game, has a very strong goal in life informed by her backstory. Her goal of wanting Bridget to have independence and stand as an equal to Fodlan is a noble one. She was also stuck as a hostage for a while there, so her commitment to her people in spite of her disadvantages says a lot about how strong she is as a person. This also explains why so many of her supports are about exchanging cultural information. It's not only fun to watch, but it's also practical for Petra's goals. I think Petra does enjoy sharing about her culture, but it also gets future powerful people in Fodlan to engage with and grow to respect her and her culture. So all that's great. So why is she kinda low on the list? To me, the part where she feels a little weaker than other characters is the journey it takes for her to achieve those goals. When Petra wants something, she just kinda gets it. She doesn't really struggle to achieve those goals or have something that feels like it's significantly holding her back. Like, yeah, she doesn't have a perfect grasp on the Fodlan language, but that doesn't cause any problems other than ones played out for a gag. Also, anytime a support attempts to bring up a potential obstacle for Petra to overcome, it gets resolved as quickly as it gets mentioned. When Byleth suggests that Petra might be overworking herself, she just says that she has to because it's her duty to do so, and the subject never comes up again. In her support with Caspar, she spends the CMB support not holding anything against him, only for the A support to both address her mixed feelings about their fathers and then resolve them at the same time. All of that isn't inherently a bad thing. I think Petra's resilience is one of her defining traits even. I just feel like her specific set of very interesting circumstances should affect her more. There could have been an opportunity to explore how being a foreigner puts her at a disadvantage like with Claude and Dedue. Maybe have her be underestimated, put down, and condescended to by her Fodlan peers, make her resilience waver, have her doubt herself for a bit, but then find the resolve to rise above that doubt. As is, her story is certainly still empowering, but maybe at the expense of relatability. I feel like I'd admire her strength more than I already do if something felt like it held her back for a while. She's like, girl bosses too close to the sun. What can I say?
Prepare to be dazzled!
When playing through each route one more time, as research for this video, I kept asking myself this question for each character. What is the core of their characterization? And until these recent playthroughs, I didn't know how to answer that for many of these characters. And that was definitely true for Manuela. I get her now, though. Manuela is someone who left the opera because she wanted a more stable life. Opera stars are likely similar to athletes in this setting, in the sense that you're considered practically elderly by the time you hit 30. Manuela believes that she's not in her prime anymore as a result, and begins to develop some bad habits because of that self-perception. She thinks, I can never be my best again, so why even try? This only makes things worse, and her self-perception becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy of sorts. She only gets out of this way of thinking through the encouragement of others. Aww. Despite how she views herself, her allies still revile her kindness, singing voice, and ability to inspire others. To them, it doesn't matter if she's not at her absolute best, because she's their friend, and that's enough. Now, as I say this, I kick myself for not understanding this earlier. It seems so obvious now. If I had to explain why this arc might have evaded me, other than the fact that I don't rewatch Manuela's supports super often, is because although Manuela ends her arc realizing that she's still got it, there's not as much follow-through or change of behavior based on that realization. It would be nice to see her resolve to overcome a negative habit like her drinking or something like that when she realizes that she shouldn't give up on herself. But, you know, the arc we get is fine though. Shrugs.
That's the spirit!
I remember a while ago reading this Tumblr post analyzing Fodlan's fashion design that described Leonie like this. Yeah, pretty accurate. Leonie fits right in with the Golden Deer house by bringing one of the most unique perspectives in the game. Such a concept is one of that house's defining themes. She also has a lot of spunk and a particular tomboy energy that I find charming. However, when talking about Leonie, I do have to bring up the whole Geralt thing. Frowny face. Sorry, Leonie fans. Because meeting Geralt is a key part of her backstory that explains a lot about her attitude and future aspirations. I take issue with some aspects of how Leonie's attachment to Geralt is handled, specifically. Now here's the thing. I can believe that Leonie would be greatly inspired if she got to be apprenticed by someone frequently called in-game, quote, the greatest knight who ever lived. She's from the middle of nowhere, so the opportunity she gets with Geralt would be a big deal. So I totally get why she talks him up, is inspired by him, and wants to be a mercenary like him. What I actually take issue with is that for as much as she mentions Geralt, she doesn't actually share many personal details or stories that would flesh out what their time together was actually like. Most of what you get is her listening to stories from someone like Alois and just going, oh, that's Geralt for you, in a way that implies familiarity, but she doesn't really turn around and share anything back. It's hard for me to understand what their dynamic was back then, which in turn makes it hard to understand where she's coming from when she, for example, is super competitive towards Byleth in their C&B supports. I would like to know why she's so emotionally attached to this extent. Another problem is just that Geralt isn't playable, so the bits and pieces you see of the two interacting are minimal, which admittedly is not Leonie's fault, rather a limitation from the game. I will state again that Leonie is not completely defined by Geralt. In other supports that have nothing to do with Geralt, which is most of them, she is perfectly fine. Her other supports tend to explore her practical mind and go-getter attitude, likely spurred on from being a commoner with something to prove. And those moments are engaging. Thumbs up. Hubert's good. He fills the role as Edelgard's retainer pretty well. There is a particular way he grows that I've noticed, and it's with how he treats people that are or could potentially be allies for Edelgard or otherwise useful to the Empire. Hubert at the beginning of the game does show concern about other people's bad habits, reckless behavior, or bad mindsets, but he mainly brings up those concerns because, in his mind, it's just the more practical thing to do. It's more for Edelgard's sake than anyone else's. As time goes on, though, Hubert grows to look out for his allies more because he personally cares for them outside of their perceived usefulness. He would be affected if something were to happen to his friends. I can also appreciate his tendency to actively go against Edelgard's orders, usually to do some of the dirty work that she disapproves of. Hubert is likely well aware of the underhanded and deceptive tactics that the Imperial nobles do all the time, and so he likely feels like he has to engage in similar behavior in order to protect Edelgard more than anything else. However, this questionable aspect about him is balanced out by him having the most strong and outward hatred for Twisted, albeit mainly for the things they did to Edelgard more than anything else, which is fair. My biggest reason for hating an organization would likely be the personal thing they did to my loved one too.
Going for the kill.
Shamir is one of those characters I don't have a ton to say about. I like her, and her arc of growing from detached to attached to the people of Fodlan is pretty solid and heartwarming. We love that for her. Honestly, a great way to sum up that growth is with her death quote of all things. It's genuinely one of the most depressing ones, which is saying a lot because there's a lot of competition.
Finally found so many reasons to live.
Like, dang. Her very straight-to-the-point nature plays off well with a lot of the students she teaches, and her partnership with Catherine in particular is a pretty fun dynamic. Her views about loyalty also bring some much-needed variety to the Church of Cerro's characters. Because of her presence, you get the sense that not every person who's employed by the church views the job as something virtuous or honorable, or even just the idea that not everyone employed by the church is religious. It's probably just a job for many people, which I think adds some realism to the setting. Otherwise, though, she's not a character that evokes my incessant rambling that much. I think she'd appreciate my brevity when talking about her, honestly.
Nope.
Definitely one of the characters with a less conventional arc. Like, Caspar starts and ends the story as someone whose sense of justice is based on gut feelings and acts on impulse. A question you may ask is, does he change? And the answer is, yeah, and no. Basically, his usual way of going about life and dealing out justice is questioned by other characters. So, he grapples with it, gains some nuance, adjusts some behavior, but ultimately decides that he can't deny who he is. If he's going to be a warrior for good, he's got to trust himself. It's like when you hear a fair critique of a movie you like, and it forces you to think deeper about why you like the movie in response. You may not change your mind about the movie, but you might change by understanding yourself and the movie a little more. And I don't think he's lesser than other characters for growing like that. I think the only sticking point for me is that I feel like there should be more of this middle point in the story where his B supports, for example, show him questioning himself when he shares his opinions with other characters, just to tie his arc together a little more concisely, you know? This wouldn't have to play out in a super dramatic way, just a couple more potentially lighthearted moments where he catches himself and realizes that he doesn't really have an explanation as to why he does certain things. Otherwise, he is a very entertaining character who brings a very chaotic energy that is fun to see other characters react to.
Let me paint you a picture!
Despite being a fellow artist, Ignatz as a character actually doesn't personally click with me a whole lot. There's a couple potential reasons for this, but I think the big one is that my family is actually supportive of my creative dreams. Ignatz can't say the same, and it's the core reason as to why he has this huge self-esteem issue in general. A lot of Ignatz's characterization meshes pretty well with being an artist. Personality-wise, he's observant, sensitive in the good way, and appreciates the small things. He has a tendency to describe things in a very thoughtful, detailed, and poetic manner that makes sense for the artist archetype, TM, even when the subject isn't about art at all. And generally, he approaches the world looking for beauty. He's pretty much the exact type of person who you'd think would have a knack for art. Unfortunately, his passion for art is shunned, diminished, and ridiculed before he even enters Garrick Mach. Because his passion for art is linked to so many other aspects about him, when his passion is put down by his family, it's like his entire sense of self is also being put down too. So yeah, that would really affect your self-esteem in general, not just with your artwork. It's only when other characters actually appreciate his skills, accept him for who he is, and encourage him to pursue what's right that he rediscovers his own strengths and has the courage to embrace them. It's a pretty solid arc.
You're making me work!
The certified girly pop of this game. Hilda is a character who's set up as someone who's never been empowered to take on responsibility. Her brother is the one who has all these accolades, and both him and her father seem to have a habit of doting on Hilda, perhaps too much. I think this results in her never being challenged or encouraged to forge her own path in life. Also, Hilda seems pretty avoidant on taking on responsibility because she fears letting people down. She's mentioned a couple of times in her supports that she's seen Holst let people down, and those experiences seem to cause her to think, if someone like my brother can still greatly disappoint people, what will happen if I do the same? This makes me think about how she justifies certain behaviors like schmoozing people into doing work for her, or trying to avoid the front lines, or denying her very real talents. When someone asks her why she does this, she spins her actions into something altruistic, i.e., it makes people feel good when they help me, or it's actually better for everyone if I stay on the sidelines. They're presented as if she's doing a favor, but to put it in a chronically online way, I think it's kinda cope on her part. Now, I bring this up not to demonize the girl. If anything, she does this justification thing both for her kinda iffy actions and for her good ones. For example, she frequently goes out of her way to help people a lot, but justifies doing so by thinking that it's actually less work to help than not to. In many situations, she's not giving herself credit either for her skills and abilities or for her good deeds. She does grow over time, though, to go out of her way to help others, be kind, and find ways to contribute. However, she still maintains this philosophy of wanting to live her life however she pleases without the pressure of following a particular duty or whatever. For a while, I've struggled with how these two conclusions about her character could coexist without being contradictory, but I've come to a conclusion. I think for Hilda's actions, she cares more about why she does them than what she does. I think to her, the good things people do matter more when people are compelled to do them out of their own volition rather when they feel obligated to. To her, if she does a good deed when she's expected to, it feels inauthentic. And now I can rejoice, because no lie, Hilda was the hardest character to figure out of anyone on this list. I'm being so for real, and it feels so good to feel like I'm not completely missing something and leaning too much on personal bias. That being said, the only small thing I have to critique is that her mentality of wanting to live how she pleases does come from a place of privilege, and I'm not sure how much that aspect of her mentality gets explored. Like, it's great that she has the ability to choose what she does, but there are plenty of other noble characters in this game that don't necessarily get to do the same. I just wish that was more acknowledged personally. But other than that, wow, Hilda's got some pretty interesting psychology, actually.
Ready or not!
Annette is at the very top of what I would say is the chunk of characters that I consider good. I debated whether she should be at the start of the great characters or not, but it didn't feel right to do in a way that I can only describe as being a gut feeling that is both subconscious and subjective. I find Annette's character to be pretty solid, and her quirks endearing, but they don't speak to me, I guess. I can see why other people rank her higher, though, especially if you find a lot of her traits particularly endearing, entertaining, relatable, etc. And in terms of the deeper things going on with her, I can also appreciate how her story flows very logically from one thing to the next. Annette's a very textbook example of a Three Houses character who's written very consistently and thoughtfully. Annette is a talented girl raised in a happy family where she is rewarded when she achieves some standard of perfection. That family becomes broken when Gustav leaves, so Annette seeks intense study as a way to chase after him. Due to this, she develops a tendency to constantly be doing something all the time. However, she still feels inadequate despite her achievements because they were all for the sake of her father, who she either hasn't found or reconciled with yet, depending on the route or the time. It makes her efforts seem like they're not enough, regardless of how much she's accomplished to get where she is. Her coming to terms with her father's absence, and or having his absence be filled with other companionship, is what allows her to be kinder to herself when she makes a mistake. It's very sweet. And that growth works whether Annette and Gustav actually reconcile their relationship or not, which is what we call multi-route versatility.
No hesitation!
Byleth sits in this odd area separating characters that I think are good and characters that I think are great. They're kind of an odd character to talk about. More than anyone else, you have to analyze how their characterization is mixed in with gameplay. When it comes to this, I'm torn. In some respects, I think the way Byleth is able to embody both the main themes of the game, things like perspective and the butterfly effect especially, and the experience the player goes on throughout the game to be genuinely clever. We'll talk about those positives first. I'd argue that Byleth has 4 ways in which they develop. 1. Getting more in touch with their emotions. 2. Uncovering the mystery behind who they are. 3. Gaining more personal agency over their actions. And 4. Pursuing a destiny. 2 things to note about this list. For one, Each of these things gets emphasized more than the others depending on the route. This came about because each route has their own distinct themes that naturally make one aspect of Byleth come up more often than the others. Second thing to note is that they all can mirror the player's experience over time as they play as Byleth. When you play the game, you 1. Get more emotionally invested in the characters. 2. Begin to unpack the mysteries not just surrounding Byleth, but also the story at large. 3. Become more encouraged to make decisions through dialogue choices, how you spend your time in the monastery, how you build your team, etc. And 4. Be able to see the game through to the end like the devs intended. Basically, you grow with Byleth as you engage with the game. And that's pretty cool. So with all of this said, why can't I definitively say that Byleth is a great character? Well, I think there's something holding them back related to their player character status. The explanation may shock you, probably because it's, not what you're thinking. I'm not going to sit here and say that I think Avatar characters are bad or even inherently weaker than characters who aren't. I think when done well, they can be compelling and even be enhanced because the player has direct control over their actions. Insert obligatory mention of ludonarrative here. Byleth's character does this in some respects, as we just talked about, but there's still something that bothers me. I think that there are times where it is hard to understand what's actually going on in Byleth's head. A lot of other silent protagonists, for example, have an internal monologue, and have direct thoughts about what's happening. Sometimes, they have too much internal monologue, looking at you, Danganronpa. Byleth gets this so rarely that I wouldn't blame you if you can't think of an instance where it happens. As such, a lot of their development frequently has to be observed by other characters. They are still developing, mind you, but it has this third-person quality that is more muddy than the rest of the cast development. That muddiness feels especially odd for a character that you're controlling the whole time. There's also not many scenes where Byleth gets to be the one to deeply express their opinions and feelings. Usually only other characters get that role when interacting with Byleth one-on-one. A scene that does do this is when Byleth gets comforted by their house leader when Geralt dies. Byleth is able to be the vulnerable one for a change, and it's refreshing. So it's not like there aren't opportunities to explore that with Byleth's character, player avatar or not. It's just that the game doesn't take advantage of those opportunities. I understand Byleth's dialogue is limited because it's a gameplay function, but I feel the game doesn't push those limitations as much as it could have. So yeah, being a player character isn't worse than a normal character, it's just harder to pull off really well. But I did want to give credit to the gameplay implementation that works, because that is embedded into who Byleth is. Byleth is able to embody story through gameplay in some really cool ways, and I felt like that was important to showcase.
Child's play.
If you analyze Rhea, Seteth, and Flayn as a trio, they have this past, present, and future motif to them. Specifically, this motif relates to how the Great Canyon Massacre is affecting them. Here's how I think it works. The Red Canyon Massacre has Rhea chained to the past, Seteth focused on the present, and Flayn looking toward the future. I think it's actually an interesting lens to view these characters through, and especially to discuss what makes them different as Nabatean characters. Flayn's character is what really got me thinking about this past, present, future thing. I thought that her perspective and choices as a character were an interesting contrast to the other Nabateans. Flayn, like her father and Rhea, was there during the battle where Nemesis would be slain. It is the exhaustion from that battle that would cause Flayn to sleep for 1,000 years, in fact. She has rare blood, and a secret identity that she must protect from the threat of Twisted that continues to plague Fodlan even after her slumber. Despite all this, she wants to move on from everything that has happened. She wants to make friends, help people, and experience this new era she now lives in, and just generally live her life as she pleases. Sure, the trauma of a genocide still stings, and there's still a lot of danger on the world, but she's willing to face it. She alone represents a younger, or future, so to speak, generation of Nabateans. She wants to participate in building a safer world that will lead to a brighter future. In that way, her squabbles with her father, curiosity about modern Fodlan culture, and desire to make friends are done with her own next steps in mind. To her, taking the risks that come with those actions are better than staying stuck in the past and hiding away.
I have something to ask of you.
Immediately following Flayn is Seteth. As I said, Seteth gets to be the present in this dynamic because he's neither held back as much as Rhea nor is as forward-thinking as Flayn. Seth being in hiding for 1,000 years, I think has allowed him to enter current events with a fresh set of eyes, as opposed to Rhea, who has been actively more involved with humanity the whole time. He's got opinions that shock some characters for how seemingly counter they are to the Church's core beliefs. For example, Seth is able to recognize that things like the nobility and crest systems have significant flaws that harm people, even though those systems are things that Rhea established years ago for the sake of keeping the power of crests in check. On the other hand, while he seeks to find what is best for Fodlan right now, he also understands that there is a lot of work to do in order to get a peaceful, safe future. This is showcased with his relationship with Flayn, with how protective he is of her. Like, yes, he's her father, he's gonna be that way. But their dynamic also represents two different points of view. Flayn is thinking about her own future filled with friends and peace, which she feels is in her right to pursue. However, it also makes sense that Seth wants her to be more aware of the current danger of pursuing that. Before that safer future arrives, Seth reminds us of the work that we have to put in right now.
Defenseless, are we?
Ingrid for a while had this one aspect to her that I couldn't shake. It's not the racism, actually. That'd be kinda obvious, huh? I guess about that real quick. Racism is never rational, which is the case with Ingrid. Even if the people of Duscur were involved in the tragedy, that would not justify her attitudes towards them. That said, narratively, this part of her is treated like a flaw. She realizes it's a flaw, and grows to overcome the flaw by realizing that she's having an irrational response due to her grief. I think it's a flaw that's handled pretty well. That said, if it's still off-putting to you, and you can't look past it, not in my right to say otherwise. Don't blame you. So, it's actually the nagging that was hard to get over for me. Part of that is the very subjective reason that when she really harps on people about rules and stuff, it really reminds me of an aspect of my younger self that I just cringe at, so that's not very nice. But it's also because I can't pinpoint where it comes from. Like, I guess she might take on a lot of responsibility for other people because she's copying how much her father sacrificed. She's also seeing her childhood friends develop some concerning habits that she feels compelled to help them with, but I don't get the lecturing approach. To compare it to, like, Felix, who also calls out other people's flaws. With him, the game is more willing to unpack that behavior as a response to both the tragedy and also things like Dimitri showing his darker side. With Ingrid, her nagging is more hand-waved with this notion of, oh, that's just the way she is, and I just want an actual reason. She does eventually try a different approach in A supports, where the lectures go away, and she gets to have a genuine heart-to-heart with characters that she has been having conflict with, for the most part. So I do think she subtly learns to change in that regard. Regardless, that's only one part of her that is absent in plenty of supports. The thing I do find compelling is her conflict about wanting to help her family versus pursue her dream, which I'd say is the main core thing about her. My favorite part about this conflict is how her father seems to actually be a decent guy. He sacrificed a lot for her, which I think feeds into her need to want to give back to her family and her people. If he was a flat-out jerk, I think it would make her ultimate decision to follow her dreams a less interesting choice. In this situation, I understand her fears that becoming a knight would be abandoning certain responsibilities. Her own noble family has it hard. Imagine what it's like for the commoners she's supposed to protect. It makes sense that it takes time for her to think through the nuance of her situation and potentially find a path that allows her to follow both her dreams and help her family. Ingrid generally has this common theme of needing to be a little selfish and not take on so much responsibility for other people, which is good on her.
With my own two hands!
Cyril wins the award for surprising me the most during my repeat playthroughs for this video. Cyril is frequently pinned as a Lady Rhea simp, which I'm just so sick of that word. I want to nuke it 2 billion times. It's true that, like Leone, the nature of his relationship with Rhea is vague, because Rhea doesn't have any opportunity to interact with him one-on-one, which, yes, does cause the same issue of not knowing if his personal attachment to Rhea is justifiable to some extent. However, I'd argue that in the grand scheme of his character, this issue matters less. Because yeah, it does seem like he only talks and thinks about Rhea, but what if I told you that's kind of the point? At first. Cyril's life is defined by Rhea during the start of the pre-time skip/C supports, but that's because I'd argue his arc is about doing some self-actualization. Cyril starts the game having a simple life that he's pretty content with. In his mind, all of his basic needs are finally getting met. Food, shelter, job/purpose, not being a literal slave. Since he has those basic needs filled, he initially doesn't even consider thinking outside of those needs. However, over the course of the game, Cyril makes friends, he gains new skills, and he starts thinking about future aspirations that might potentially involve him leaving the church one day. I think that's pretty realistic for a kid in his position. I'd imagine that it's only when you have your basic needs met that you begin to think about defining who you are. Wait, that's straight up that pyramid thing that you see about needs, right? Oh look, it is! See, Cyril has these bottom 2 layers filled, so now he can try to get the other 3. I actually think this real psychological concept was maybe an inspiration when writing Cyril's character. And Cyril can grow in this way without having to completely abandon Rhea or think that she sucks, actually, since that distracts from the point. The point of his character is not to be defined by just one thing, and instead to be well-rounded, which I think is pretty cool, and actually kind of makes his journey stand out amongst the rest of the cast.
I will not back down one step!
One thing that I thought a lot about with Ferdinand was thinking about the ways he and Lorenz are different. They're both foils to the main lord of their house that think pretty highly of their noble status, but despite their egos, they do ultimately care about the future of their respective lands. I think the distinction with Ferdinand is that he is more focused on personal legacy. Ferdinand seems to believe that he is the true main leader of Dorothea. No doubt something affected by the Prime Minister and his allies currently having more power than Edelgard's dad at the start of the story. He wants to make his mark on history so much that it ends up clouding his judgment for the future. It's only until he's exposed to different points of views that he's humbled. It's to the point where he's kinda embarrassed at his old self. He also tends to lean in when people dislike him or the nobility, adopting an open-minded posture to criticism as opposed to being more immediately defensive. This posture helps him in the end because he realizes that he can't insert himself as the main character in the story and get victory through his own skill alone. I also think he serves as a pretty good counter for Edelgard. Edelgard is someone who had to fight tooth and nail to get where she is at the start of the story. The same can't be said for Ferdinand. I think this distinction is why Edelgard does surpass Ferdinand in many ways. Though Ferdinand does have knowledge and skill in his own right, he also at the start of the story has never experienced any major bumps in the road in his life. He has blind spots due to that privilege. Edelgard might also be privileged in many ways, but the trauma she experienced gave her a particular resilience and grit to achieve her goals that you can only gain from hitting a low point in life. Ferdinand also represents a lot of ideas that Edelgard would rather leave behind. Initially, he only represents things that would be better for Edelgard to get rid of, but once he gets humbled, has a more nuanced opinion, and completely disregards the bad aspects about nobility is when he's actually able to be Edelgard's guide. Even if he sides against her, he still gains that better understanding of both Edelgard as an enemy and his own weakness, and can take those lessons with him after the war.
So many openings.
Gilbert gets a lot of flack for abandoning his family. If you are the type that hates him for that, I'd say that's perfectly fine. Deadbeats are unfortunately not an uncommon thing in real life. So with that, it might seem kinda illegal to rank him this high, especially above his own daughter, but sorry, I just think he's interesting to talk about. Even if his downer personality doesn't make him the most entertaining support partner. And I get it. I used to never look too deeply at him because I couldn't get over him leaving and then never communicating with his family. Now when I watch his supports, I think, wow, Fargus Knight culture must suck if someone who clearly cares for his family were to mentally ill himself into doing all this. And he really is seriously going through it mentally. It's the reason why Gilbert is able to help Dimitri so much with his feelings of guilt. Gilbert has struggled with the same thoughts. It also helps that both Gilbert and Dimitri abandon their responsibilities at some point because of said guilt, so they have the commonality there. But let's get back to that knight thing. You can see this with other Fargus characters too, but the way knights are expected to always perform their duty, stick to specific values, and die for their causes is really messed up. And Gilbert is a reflection of some of the worst consequences of that, Other than dying, of course. And to be clear, none of this makes the deadbeat thing okay, but it gives context to the bad actions. Just like how we understand that Dimitri's murderous low point in life is because of all the stuff he went through. And that context gives hope for redemption of sorts, which happens in Gilbert's support with Annette. And it's very touching. Gilbert's story isn't really a process of him taking all of these steps towards redemption, it's more about the process of him realizing that he should take those steps towards redemption, because it's the best thing that he can do now to truly make up for the mistakes he agonizes over.
Where do I start?
As I mentioned in the Eloise section of this video, the purpose of the faculty characters could be in part to help encourage growth in the student characters who still need to figure out some parts of themselves. In that regard, no other faculty character does that better than Catherine. Catherine is able to bring out a lot of interesting moral dilemmas in other characters just by being open about her own moral code. Another YouTuber, BigKlingy, said it best in his own ranking video when he described Catherine as being morally similar to the lawful neutral alignment in D&D, which, if you're unfamiliar with that term, basically means that you are more dedicated to following a set of rules, a code, or a person, regardless if those actions always lead to an objective good or evil. What makes this work is that Catherine is very self-aware that she's done some atrocious things in the name of following Rhea. She doesn't want her role as a Knight of Ceres to be idealized, she's just a knight doing her job. She also understands that some of her actions do have consequences that can really negatively affect other people, like how her turning in Ash's brother would inadvertently cause Lonato to be manipulated into doing something reckless. Knowing she's a fugitive who had to be taken in by Rhea because Lonato accused her of a crime that she didn't commit also adds some extra context to her way of thinking. Catherine both having her life saved by Rhea and then also needing to be taken in by her both explain a lot about why she's so dedicated to Rhea in a personal sense, which is kind of the motivation needed to make that lawful neutral side of her work. The talk about her morality also ends up being a double-edged sword, because since she's got her ethics figured out, there's no supports challenging said ethics, which could have been interesting. Then again, Catherine being so firm in her beliefs, I think allows her to really encourage other characters to figure out their own sense of justice for themselves. My most recent Blue Lions playthrough made me also appreciate things about her aside from the more serious stuff, like her kind of rough and tumble attitude and how she acts in more casual conversation. And I think she's a lot of fun in these situations too.
An offensive sight!
Lawrence is probably the character that is the easiest to identify as flawed at the start of the game. Most people have a pretty strong first impression of the guy, and it's usually, ew! People get the ick. I actually find that Lorenz's obvious flaws work in his favor, as it gives him a ton of room to grow. In fact, I think one of the biggest intentions of how he's written is to highlight that growth. This shows up the most in the Golden Deer route, where he's a direct counter to Claude. He's outwardly suspicious of Claude, he has different ideas about what Fodlan's future should be than Claude, all that jazz. Lawrence's growth seems to be about changing his perception about status and how your role in life is affected by that status. Lawrence starts out thinking in a very binary way about the relationship between commoner and noble, to the point where he won't even accept help from a commoner student, even though they are technically supposed to be on similar standing ground at the academy. He clearly cares about the common folk though. Like, I buy that he's thinking purely practically when he says that he can't marry a commoner. Ironically, his need to separate the roles of noble and commoner is the exact thing that hinders the common folk he's trying to look out for. He's also so caught up in his duties that he doesn't even realize how much of his own happiness he might potentially have to sacrifice to do that. His rapport with Mercedes really showcases this. She says a lot of pretty scathing things about him, but her statement about how his way of living is kind of sad is what sticks with me the most. And Lawrence has internalized his duties so much that he genuinely doesn't realize how staunchly sticking to them affects his life for worse. He doesn't have to be rigid. Plenty of other noble characters in this game aren't. It also becomes more clear how much of his beliefs are copied from his father's example, which may or may not be a person you want to copy from, ahem. And over time, he learns to make his noble responsibilities his own. Being looser about the roles of noble and commoner end up increasing the happiness of both, because both groups get more agency and flexibility. Yippee!
See ya!
Balthus is probably the weakest Ashen Wolf, but that's still not a bad thing to be. I really like all the wolves, and their group dynamic is so funny. I wish we saw more of them as a group. The whole concept of the Ashen Wolves is already pretty great, as it gives the writers opportunities to write characters with backstories and perspectives that normally wouldn't make sense for the regular students or faculty of the academy to have. It allows conversations about the many relevant topics important to Three Houses lore, TM, to go in different directions. Balthus does this unique perspective thing the least, which is maybe why he's the lowest of the wolves, but in some sense that tracks. He's a punch first, ask questions later kind of guy, who operates in a pretty uncomplicated way. Yet he's not 100% himbo like Raphael is. He's able to figure out Claude's place of birth pretty quickly, which few other characters are able to do. He's also too self-aware about his bad habits to say he's just a dumb jock type. Actually, about that bad habit thing, I noticed that Balthus mainly grows by gaining more responsibility, but only when it comes to helping others with their problems or supporting their causes. He's still gonna live that free roamer life, but he's more willing to back up Yuri or beat up monsters for Happy. On a completely unrelated note, Balthus is also funny. Like, the stuff he says and the way his voice actor delivers his lines is just so great.
It's your own rare crest, so I'm sure you figured it out. Unless you think the goddess gave us these things while we slept. Wait, do you?
His character gets some of the most laughs out of me, both intentional and unintentional. Like, his death quote is so stupid, I can't take it seriously.
After all this time, it turns out I'm the king of dying.
10 out of 10. No notes.
I may as well win.
Lynn was a character that I didn't understand for a while. For a couple of years, I thought he was relatable in a handful of ways, but I couldn't quite place why he went about certain interactions the way he did. Then I was diagnosed with autism. And then ADHD. And it began to make sense. Then I also had two of my other neurodivergent friends watch me play the game. And it made more sense. Because he feels very coded that way to me. I want to say it's an intentional choice, just like how Marianne is depressed, Bernie is anxious, and everyone has PTSD. The main reason I'm choosing to interpret him this way is that it makes certain aspects of him make more sense under that context, which in turn also makes him more likable. This is especially for certain behaviors that might be otherwise interpreted as him being uncaring or stepping over the line. He doesn't mean to say some kinda out-of-pocket things, he's just got that autistic swagger, and I love that for him. One aspect that I relate to the most about him is that he's afraid that his passion for crest research will become a chore for him if it becomes a job instead of a hobby. As a creative person myself, I do have similar worries about burning myself out, getting caught up in the art career grind. Aside from the relatability, he's just a solid character all around. I like how he grows to learn the value of putting in the work sometimes, even if it's not an enjoyable thing to do. It pairs nicely with how he initially doesn't know why he's so interested in crests, to later wanting to use his pursuit of knowledge to specifically help the people he cares about, in his own kind of way, which is very cute to me.
What is happening? Oh, very interesting.
One of the most fun characters in this game, honestly. The two sides of her personality are just so strange. It's both very entertaining when it's used for comedy, and also a quirk about her that I like to speculate on. Is it from her crest? Does it run in her family? Is it something her brain developed from the trauma of losing her home? Just the concept of a character being a disgraced noble, because, from what I understand, Nouvelle sided with the Emperor during the Insurrection of the Seven, bad choice, and was left to die at the hands of Dagda by the nobles actually in power. And in a weird way, Constance being a disgraced noble gave her a perspective that should end up being beneficial later on. She now knows what it's like to have very little, and so when she gets her title back, she has an actual idea of what it's like being a disadvantaged commoner because of her personal experience. That's something that most noble characters just don't or can't replicate. I also appreciate how she grows to be more accepting of her sad side. The sad half of her tends to expose her true fears and insecurities that she covers up on her happy side. Constance really wants to believe that she can one day reclaim her title, but somewhere inside her she fears that that might never happen. Constance seems to dislike her sad side, laying out these inner fears for everyone to know. And Constance is a pretty self-sufficient person too, which doesn't help. However, once she has people in her life she can trust, and a tangible path towards getting her house restored, she's able not to be so hard on that more vulnerable side. It's great.
Eternity awaits!
Easily the most misunderstood person in this game, which I think part of that is just because she gets much less to work with than the other major characters in this game do. Rhea isn't playable like the other main characters, nor has any supports that would give her a chance to be humanized in the way other characters get. Seriously though, what are her hobbies? Likes and dislikes? Struggles with being an archbishop? Most of the cutscenes we see her in are ones where she's telling you to go to a place and do a thing. It's all business. It's too bad though, since I think she is a fascinating character once you piece together what her whole deal is. For this entry especially, I figured it would be important to revisit that Nintendo Dream interview with the two directors of the game that came out a few years ago. I remember that they clarified a lot of stuff about Rhea and her intentions. Genuinely, if you have the time, this is an essential read for anyone who is as mentally ill about the game as myself. Anyway, in the interview, they more clearly state and go more into detail about things that you can gather from Rhea's dialogue. Lore drop. Basically, the Nabateans were powerful dragon people that ruled over humans in various parts of Fodlan. One day, the Agarthans seek to overthrow that power, kill the dragons for their powerful bones, and entice the humans to continue the bloodshed for their own bid for power. This is where Nemesis and the 10 elites come from. This is also why Rhea chooses to rewrite history to make the elites out to be corrupted heroes, when they were just murderers the whole time. The humans, naturally, sympathize with the human elites. So if Rhea is going to try to rule and guide them, she has to consider humanity's feelings, as the directors put it. It's pretty fascinating. I get the vibe from this interview that Rhea, though not perfect, always had good intentions for most everything she does. Is she stuck in the past? Yeah. Does the fear of a repeated tragedy cause her to cling onto systems she established that have flaws? Also, yeah. But do you get why she's trying to keep humanity in check? I think so. I also understand what she seeks to gain by getting Sothis back. Rhea says that Sothis created the Nabateans. And so if Sothis were to come back, not only would Rhea have her mother back, but Sothis would potentially make more Nabateans. And so Rhea could have her people, her culture back. Something that she has been without for 1,000 years. I'm sad that Silver Snow is handled the way it is. I think it would have been interesting for Rhea to play a more active role in that story. She could have been playable and had an arc about learning to accept what had happened, appreciate Byleth as their own person outside of a Sothis vessel, and acknowledge that what she established hundreds of years ago might need changes. Rhea's complexity, despite all of this, is still fascinating. I need to meticulously dissect her brain.
Excuse me!
Mercedes has mainly two things going on with her. The first is her obvious connection to the Death Knight, and the other being her struggle for autonomy because of her slimy adoptive father. Both things end up connecting very nicely as one narrative for her character. It's no secret that Mercedes really feels guilty for leaving Emile behind all those years ago. This, and the fact that she was raised by a church for a very long time, has instilled in her this desire to really put good back into the world and to continue to help people. But at current, she's being held back by her father, who is putting her down a path in life that will restrict her ability to do good. Due to this, I think the best she feels like she can do in her current circumstance is just be the kind, older sister type to other characters. She might internally justify playing out this role as a way to make up for leaving Emile behind. However, she seems to feel somewhat inadequate at truly helping people because of both her inability to help Emile in the past and because she has so little control over her life in the present. This connection only clicked for me when I observed a few moments where she assumed that she was being a bother, in supports. I realized that this perceived inability to be helpful might be a place of insecurity for her. This doesn't stop her from trying to be there for people. Her desire to help others ends up being stronger than her self-doubt, which is admirable. She's able to overcome those feelings of doubt when she realizes that she is helpful, and her kindness does impact people positively, which in turn gives her the strength to fight for her dreams. So yeah, I just really appreciate how all of the different aspects of her character fit together very nicely.
I don't have time for this!
If I'm honest, Lysithea used to be in my bottom 5 least favorite students. I think the main sticking point was that I just really disliked how mean she was. It wasn't until my most recent Golden Deer playthrough that I realized I'm kinda acting like this one tweet. I have to remember that Lysithea pre-time skip, which is when she lashes out the most, is still like 15, and is of course gonna lash out in an immature, projecting way when conversation hits a sore spot for her. Like, obviously she hates being called a child all the time because she thinks she's just gonna live and die a child. That's all her life's gonna get to be. She also doesn't go off on people as much as I had remembered, and when she does lash out at, say, a more sensitive character like Marianne, she has a moment immediately after where she realizes that she went too far. This is true even in C supports, when a character's flaws are usually at their most obvious. So yeah, the flaw is perfectly explained, and it wasn't so overplayed to the point that it becomes super tedious and annoying, so I got over it. This brought me to the question of where she should land on the list, and as I was sitting here, figuring out which characters should go above or below others, and I realized that there's not much wrong with Lysithea's character. She's well written, she's got layers, and she can have fun banter with other members of the cast. So she shot up way higher on this list than I would have anticipated when I first started making this video. I get why she's a fan favorite now, aside from being a nuke. There's a lot of nice touches that add extra depth to her that I can really appreciate. I like how Lysithea, for example, has this insecurity about supposedly childish things that she enjoys, like dolls and sweets, but grows to realize that those are arbitrary signifiers of immaturity. I also like how she just wants to be relied on and responds well when she gets to be the one to take on responsibility. Also, even before her growth, can we acknowledge that she nobly wants to use the time she's got left to take care of her parents instead of trying to cross off a bucket list or something? The more I'm talking about her, the more her placement this high up feels right. Still don't like that support with Ignatz though. What on earth is that? Why does it end like that? Huh? Weird support.
Take me seriously.
Dorothea is a character that I initially had a hard time piecing together what her whole deal is. She's got a lot of different aspects of her character going on, and I had a hard time pinpointing what the root of it all was. I think I have an interpretation though. Shout out to this video by Cain Magnus for putting these pieces together in his video and confirming a lot of conclusions I was drawing about her. Good stuff. One of Dorothea's main traits is her perception of herself, which is very affected by how other people perceive her. Dorothea and her mother were discarded by her noble father when she was young. That caused her mother to die from illness likely acquired from being out on the streets, something that we can presume likely would not have happened if they weren't kicked out. She was able to find her way into stardom despite this, only to find that the same nobles who treated her like dirt when she was just a child on the streets were now vying for her attention, including potentially her father, who doesn't recognize her now. Yeah, I imagine that would be an experience you would internalize. It makes her goal of trying to find a stable marriage totally understandable, because without it, she's just gonna be an older woman on the streets again. Maybe have the same fate as her mom? Her youth, looks, and voice wouldn't be an aid to her like they were when Manuela discovered her. Dorothea also acts as if the rumors surrounding her don't bother her, but that's definitely not the case. I think she'd rather not be perceived, period. That's an exaggeration, but I do think she'd like to go about her daily life without constantly getting attention she doesn't initiate or want. She can be perceived in so many different types of ways, as a commoner, a songstress, a woman, a flirt, etc. It must be exhausting. So even if she can be hard on a character who's well-meaning like Ferdinand, it makes sense why she'd make assumptions. She's been burned so many times by people who perceived her a certain way and changed their behavior because of it. She thinks she can see a pattern. It's nice to see her talk with others about her insecurities and stop thinking so much about her self-perception and just live her life. Dang.
Strategy in motion!
Claude, and by the extension the Alliance, because they're kind of joined at the hip thematically, don't immediately seem to have any stake to either the Edelgard versus Rhea conflict or the Edelgard versus Dimitri conflict. However, part of his journey is establishing why he should have a stake in this conflict and why his perspective matters for all of Fodlan. He knows he's an outsider. He wants to make a better future for Fodlan, but he's underestimated and not as informed because he's not as intimately experienced with Fodlan's inner workings. He doesn't initially know much about Fodlan's problems or where the root of those problems could lie. It's only when he begins making those discoveries that he's able to truly say that he can take up the mantle of leader of Fodlan. It's then when the Alliance can actually assert itself as standing toe-to-toe with the other factions. In all of the routes that doesn't happen because Byleth isn't there to stand side by side with Claude and put their trust in him, and to help unite the Alliance / the Golden Deer as a whole. This could also be why he is the least morally gray main character in this game. His hook, so to speak, seems to be that his goals are pure and his actions aren't morally ambiguous, but he struggles for those goals to become a reality in the midst of everything else going on around him. So the whole thing about Claude wanting to face out, hold out, and reach out to the truth is also why I, maybe a hot take, kind of think that Nemesis makes sense as the final boss for Claude's route. Claude spends his narrative constantly trying to solve mysteries in order to help better Fodlan. He knows that Fodlan has a lot of baggage, but he has to understand what the root cause of all of it is. Nemesis is the origin story. His actions cause Rhea to establish societal systems in order to keep track of who has what crest, which also causes the Agarthans to hide away and cause problems behind the scenes, which causes a history of conflict and death, which leads to the game's current events. There's a reason why the fight between him and Saros is the very first thing you see when playing the game. Claude, I think, embodies his role in the story quite well. He is both mysterious and someone who wants to solve mysteries. He's unconventional for a Lord, both in terms of design, which is both as visuals and as a unit, and in personality. Maybe my one thing about Claude is that I wish he was given a narrative reason to have to open up to his friends about his past, his identity, his insecurities, take your pick. I think that would make the final cutscene where he talks about friendship hit harder because then it would feel like that speech comes from him learning a lesson and expressing it. As is, he does grow to trust in people more and be more open about his intentions. His growth is certainly more subtle than the other lords, that's for sure.
The win is mine!
Edelgard is complex, morally gray, and balancing multiple different roles depending on the route. A character like this is pretty hard to write, so let's start with her backstory, which in my opinion shapes her perspective perfectly. Being the sole survivor of a horrible event that also exposed the worst of Fodlan society would definitely shape you as a person. It makes sense that she grows into thinking that she and only she has the right knowledge to make sure something so atrocious never happens again. Given, 1, she has 2 crests, 2, she has personal experience with both Twisted, and 3, she's experienced the worst consequences of many of the flawed societal systems within Fodlan, and 4, she's in a powerful enough position to potentially fight back. There are exactly 0 other people alive with those particular set of circumstances. Her need to be the person to fix things also opens the door for narrative parallels with Dimitri and Rhea. With Rhea, her unique blood, sole survivor status, and position of power lead her to establish and maintain systems, whereas Edelgard's circumstances cause her to want to dismantle them. When it comes to Dimitri, both are characters who are sole survivors of horrible trauma who think that because of that, it's up to them to try to right that wrong. It doesn't help that her lifespan is likely shortened too because of her 2 crests, if Lysithea is anything to go by. So if she's going to change so much about Fodlan drastically, she has to do it as soon as possible. This is one of the biggest justifications for starting the war. War was bound to happen pretty soon anyway. Fodlan is broken in a lot of ways. It has a long history of violence and systemic oppression, both of which are exasperated by a group that just wants to start chaos for their own ends. When thinking all of this over, I feel how much I personally agree with her actions doesn't really matter. The question to ask is if this is an in-character conclusion for Edelgard to make, and if that conclusion is one that is built up well over the course of the narrative. And to me the answer is yes. Even with all of this, you might ask if Edelgard is still hypocritical when she claims she alone can fix Fodlan while also accusing Rhea for solely trying to steer Fodlan in a certain direction. Now, differences between the Nabateans and humans aside, I think the answer is yeah, actually. And I think that's why her dynamic with Byleth is so special. Edelgard's belief that she alone is the only person who can truly change the world for the better is what gets her killed in 3 out of 4 rounds. She takes on the Alliance, Kingdom, and Church all at once while also fighting on the front lines. Without someone in her life that she can truly view as an equal to share that burden with, she eventually runs out of stamina, which gives her enemies a chance to turn the tables on her. She would never give up, that's not in her nature, but choosing to do so will be in vain. She's ran out of resources and has no one to turn to. But if Byleth chooses to side with her, it gives her the strength to follow through on her ambitions. This is also what makes non-Crimson Flower routes tragic from her perspective. During the time skip, you can tell that there's a small part of Edelgard that wants her single-mindedness to be proven wrong. So she reaches out her hand, not expecting anything back, but secretly hoping that isn't the case. And 3 out of 4 times, she's proven right. No one answers. So she abandons that silly wish and sinks more into herself, even if it kills her.
Let's dance!
Even though the Ashen Wolves side story is apparently not canon,
Edit.
I think the story it tells still has a lot of good characterization for the wolves themselves that I wanted to take into account for this video. Yuri's the best example of this, as he gets his own little character arc of learning to give out more trust than what he is normally used to. Yuri was raised in a pretty bad area of Fargus, a very kill or be killed type of affair, where in order to survive or get ahead in life, you had to do some unsavory things. Yuri grew up this way, so I think keeping his cards close to his chest is somewhat of a survival instinct for him. Underneath the bravado and charm, though, there's a guy who's just confused about his identity and secretly resents the things he had to do to get the power he has now. Some of the things he's implied to have done get danced around for obvious reasons, but it's clear that a lot of the stuff he did feels are in such stark contrast to the actually pretty noble desire to give the poor and underprivileged a place to belong. He feels like an imposter in that way. Over time, though, Yuri is able to build a life he can genuinely be proud of and get reassurance from his friends that understanding yourself completely is not a prerequisite for self-acceptance. And I like how that growth is shown in his dialogue. More and more of his dialogue over time comes from a genuinely earnest place, with the Lord of the Underground persona fading away around people he trusts. When he says something genuinely sweet, it hits me right in the heart. It works on me.
I'll cut you down!
Felix wins the award for Most Improved, in terms of my opinion on a character. Like Lysithea, Felix was a bottom 5 student for me for a very long time. I understood that he is indeed complex, but it always bugged me how abrasive he'd be towards other characters. It doesn't help that a common fandom perception I would see is people praising Felix for, quote, always being right, and, quote, calling out the BS. I'm not gonna say those 2 statements aren't true most of the time, but to me, those things never mattered, since his approach seemed to drive people away rather than get them to listen. What's the point of being right? It's only really until post-time skip that he learns to be more competent about getting his true feelings across, and showing that he's only so frustrated because he cares more than he'd like to admit. Although, admittedly, it's not like he's great at this post-time skip either, lol. It is still a huge step for him though, I'll admit. So in order to get past this frustration with him, I just had to examine him from a clean slate, open mind, and disregard public perception for now. And when I did this on my recent Blue Lions playthrough, I kept repeating a very particular habit. A cutscene or support with Felix in it would play, it would end, and I would find myself consistently making comments and observations about him more than any other character, except for one. But we're getting there. Oh, just you wait. This process naturally led me to noticing a few new things about him. For one, he's actually pretty funny. The way he bounces off of characters like Annette, Lysithea, and Bernadetta is absolute gold. Felix is someone who I think wants to be this badass swordsman, who's seen as really skilled.
Wow, you truly are spectacular!
I know.
But in a lot of the more lighthearted supports, he just really seems like some 14-year-old weeb who really wants to be seen as cool and edgy, and it's really funny. Part of it's probably Lucian Dodge's line deliveries in these scenes that gives me this vibe.
Let's see what you... I don't know, I just don't like it. Funny ideas about food, even the bullies in her head are ridiculous. Shut up, just take the thing.
But seeing this side of him made me want to engage more with him as a character. I also noticed that Felix seems to organize the world by putting things in distinct boxes. I think when he has this falling out with his family and Dimitri, his now jaded self now leans on this straightforwardness of training as a way to ignore his difficult, complicated feelings. He can simplify his problems by thinking, train, kill, screw everything else. I think this mentality is why he wants to write off Dimitri as a bloodthirsty bore and nothing else. Because that's what's easiest to do. Because it's this obsession with training that makes him realize post-time skip that he and Dimitri aren't too different, and he hates it. This pragmatic way of looking at the world is in conflict with his personal attachments to the people in his life. Dimitri is the most obvious example. He thinks that the most logical thing to do is to completely cut Dimitri out of his life. He's seen Dimitri show a monster side, therefore he is a monster, therefore Felix should just stop associating with him, but his heart betrays him. So his expression of all of that comes out all weird and mean. To put it simply, Felix becomes really good at diagnosing a problem, but lacks the capacity to truly understand the underlying cause.
What happened to him? It's like he's a completely different person.
It's not a stretch to say that Felix lacks some emotional intelligence. When he sees Ingrid want to be a knight, even though that's technically not the practical thing to do, or sees Sylvain making the same mistakes with women over and over, he doesn't truly get the emotional reason as to why they keep doing these things. He just sees a problem. I think it's only really until post-time skip does he really become aware of this. One piece of dialogue that's always struck me is in the Silver Snow Verdant Wind routes. When you talk to him in the monastery right after Dimitri dies, he says this.
My relationship with the Boar Prince began even before I was born. He was always by my side. You might even say that, at one time, we were best friends. I couldn't fathom the depth of his hatred for the Empire. So much anguish. Could I have saved him? Could I have stopped him?
I think this is where the tragedy of his character lies. He can call out a problem, but he fails to understand the emotional truth behind the problem. But because he initially has this practical way of looking at the world, he thinks he understands how everything works and the reasons behind people's actions. And in some routes, he doesn't doubt himself until it's too late. Sometimes, he thinks he knows someone's sorrow and tries to turn away from it. And that is the act of a fool.
Open wide!
When you see people give an example of a side character in this game that has layers to them, Sylvain is frequently picked. And I think that's by design. The way Sylvain is written is practically begging the audience to look behind that womanizer archetype and see the complexity behind it, more than any other character, I think. 'Cause, sure, almost every character has more to them than meets the eye. But Sylvain's development hinges on this discovery aspect that the player experiences at the same time other characters do. You and Sylvain's support partners find out that he can be serious, he does have a backstory that explains his actions, and he can be a good person. I think the Miquelon chapter happening so early gives the players a taste of that more somber side to Sylvain. I feel like for new players, it's useful for characters to have an interesting hook in the first handful of interactions with them. Players then can't immediately write them off as this or that archetype and ignore them for the rest of the game. It worked on me, at least, when I first played this game. It used to bug me with Sylvain how he initially claims that every woman who approaches him has an ulterior motive. I realized the obvious thing, though, that his judgment is clouded, and his generalizations are something that are partially incorrect and proven wrong by other characters in the game. He's someone who's internalized so much about his role as nobility, as a crest bearer, as an heir, that he goes into interactions with most people, honestly, expecting an ulterior motive. So as we see, he starts leading on women in a weird bid for revenge against the system and a way to use the rumors around him to scare people off. This is also self-sabotage, as he gets lost in that womanizer persona. It's pretty awful, in like the good way, in the I want to eat this writing, it's so good. Only once he forms genuine bonds with people does his perception of himself begin to change, which in turn makes him more aware of how he's being closed off, which allows an actual change in behavior. It's really hard to balance a character like this, who is both sympathetic and does things that only the characters themselves can justify in their own head, but I think Sylvain is handled pretty well.
This will prove my loyalty!
Dedue is a character that soothes my soul. There is so much about his character that makes me so sad, which is balanced by so many of his supports that are so tender, like chicken nugget. Wait. Chicken tenders. Sorry. One thing that another YouTuber, Analog Vernacular, pointed out in his character ranking video is that despite being a secondary character, Dedue gets so many cool moments. And those moments are not restricted to the Blue Lions route. He shows up in Verdant Wind/Silver Snow to avenge Dimitri. He shows up in Crimson Flower to either willingly turn into a monster or have this heart-wrenching moment with Dimitri, depending on how the battle plays out. They did not have to do those alternate scenes for Crimson Flower, but they did it for Dedue, and that's great. I also think Dedue has the best paralogue in terms of story integration. His paralogue has a lot of relevance to the main story, it shows us a unique layer to Dedue's character, and allows us to learn something about the lore that we wouldn't get the chance to otherwise. If you're curious, I also made a tier list of all the paralogues based on this criteria, here it is. This paralogue is so important that the narrative will literally change depending on if you played it or not. It's essential to do if you don't want Dedue to be dead post-time skip. He's also the best vassal out of the 5 of them, because his reason for dedicating his life to Dimitri gets fleshed out the most, I feel. His trauma of losing everything and him sharing that mutual pain with Dimitri, even when they have just met, just gets me. Yet, he still feels hesitant to truly call Dimitri his friend. It's so well done. On the other hand, I like how he's not solely defined by that relationship. He clearly is sympathetic to the Dusker people, for example, who are seeking justice for their massacre. He understands their hatred of Fargus and seeks for there to be a way to begin to mend what his people lost. He doesn't stop caring about that just because he has new purpose with Dimitri. There's also how he shares his culture with other characters and the journey he goes on to feel comfortable enough discussing all that he's lost. Dedue's many things, and I think most of them make me cry. What a guy.
On my honor!
So much has already been said about Dimitri, and most of it is positive, from what I can see. So what I'm gonna do instead of the usual analysis is mention 2 specific critiques of his character and explain why I disagree. I just don't know how much I can really add in a general Dimitri is good discussion. One thing that I see people say about Dimitri is the whole, how could Dimitri think a young Edelgard was involved in the tragedy thing? It is correct to say that's an irrational thing to think, but Dimitri also hasn't been thinking rationally for quite a while up to that point, especially right after the Flame Emperor reveal. I think all sense is out the window for a pretty in-character reason to me. It probably doesn't help that his hallucinations of the dead... Oh, hold on. We interrupt the century to weigh in on the, is Dimitri actually seeing ghosts, or are they hallucinations? Question. I personally interpret them as not real. He claims to see Dedue as one of the ghosts, even if Dedue is still alive, because you did the paralogue. So, also his ghosts seem to act very out of character by being very vengeful and to the point where they are very cruel to Dimitri. I also think just on a narrative level, the hallucinations are more interesting when they represent the guilt, burden, and need for revenge that Dimitri puts on himself and doesn't have to carry. I mean, they could still represent that if they're real ghosts, but you know. Also, if they are real ghosts, and they are actually acting like that, it kinda weirdly validates Dimitri's awful actions, because then they actually are dead people egging him on. Okay, tangent over. So, he's seeing what he genuinely believes are ghosts, telling him that the Emperor is the culprit. He's gonna keep thinking that in the mental state he's in. By the time he's gained some mental clarity later in the time skip, it's just too late to back out of that conflict with Edelgard. Dimitri knows that Edelgard doesn't have much to do with the tragedy directly, but she still associates with those who did. And Dimitri is just not the type of person who will ever be able to accept that, because his moral code and Edelgard's are both understandable in character, but fundamentally different. That's what that scene where they meet up before the final battle conveys to me. Second critique. A lot of people say that Dimitri's redemption comes out of nowhere, like he just does this heel turn when Rodrigue dies. A few points about this. For one, I think people get in their head that character development, especially for things like redemption arcs, have to be this linear, smooth progression. It's a common way for growth to happen, but a hard writing rule it is not. I interpret Rodrigue's death as a wake-up call of sorts. Dimitri needs something extreme to happen in order to truly grapple with the consequences of his path of destruction. Sometimes you need a good scare to quit a bad habit for good, or a death of a close relative to get your life together. Second, there are moments before this where you can tell that there still is hope for Dimitri. Dedue returning in the cutscene that follows is the big one to me. Third is just in a game design sense, Dimitri can't be unwell for too long because he then gets locked out of useful features like supports, meals, and teaching, etc. Last point about this, if you're gonna do a redemption arc, I feel like you do need time to show that there's been a permanent change in behavior. Like, Dimitri needs to be tested to see if he'll commit to this path of personal healing and try to ditch his feelings of guilt and regret. This is important as those things are the root cause of his fall from grace. He can't truly change his behavior without there being supports that address the mentalities and personal conclusions that justify those behaviors in the first place. And make no mistake, Dimitri does prove himself. He gains responsibility for his people, he tries hard not to lose it again when Cornelia tells him about his stepmother's potential involvement in the tragedy, and he spares the life of a servant of the Kingdom Lord involved in the tragedy when he could have just executed him. They're hard decisions, but Dimitri succeeds. Dimitri's fall from grace gets frequently praised for being, so well thought out and well paced and executed. And while I think the post-time skip isn't exactly to that level, I think it should get a good amount of credit too.
Quit bugging me!
If there was any character in this game, I think I would have the best chance of becoming friends with, if they were real, it'd be Happy. There's a few superficial reasons for that. The way she speaks is kind of modern. She's pretty chill, and just kind of down to hang out. She gets the upper hand compared to the other wolves simply because I personally have a lot of affection for her and really resonate with her story on a personal level. And said story is a pretty messed up one at that. Her whole deal is she's gotta rein in her emotions because if she doesn't, in this case, with her sighing, she could potentially endanger herself and others. In addition, her monster summoning thing came from blood experimentation? Thanks, Cornelia. And said monster summoning gets her ostracized by people because of something that is distinctly not her fault. She almost gets thrown in jail because she may potentially do something. So yeah, she stays pretty apathetic as a way to cope with being mistreated in the past and the present. Messed up. That being said, it becomes clear that she does truly care about what's going on in the world and about other people, and she's a pretty empathetic person, I think. She opens up more when other characters prove that they will stick with her despite her reputation, and you can tell that means a lot to her. I distinctly remember this moment on my first ever playthrough of the game that the way I thought about Happy changed. Gerald had just died. Most characters give their condolences, but something about what Happy says to Byleth specifically really gave me pause.
Seems like you're having a hard time. Not that I can really understand what you're going through. I know that this is painful, but don't lose hope for the future, okay? Someday you'll be able to accept what's happened. And in the meantime, you have plenty of friends here to support you. Me included.
I think I just wasn't expecting her to have the kindest words out of everyone, and I just thought it was really sweet. It's like a core Three Houses memory to me. So yeah, I just started paying more attention to her character and found that her arc was something that I related to a lot. I felt rejected for parts of myself that I couldn't control. I felt left out and compelled to act like that didn't bother me. It's so easy when you experience rejection or heartache from other people to try to protect yourself by not being vulnerable, to try not to get hurt again. That's not a good way to live. We all need connection, even if that always involves taking a risk. Happy gave me hope that if I took those risks, that there would be something good in that. She gets her own little nickname because of that. Hopey. Teehee.
My blood compels me!
The emotional attachment I have for Marianne is similar to Dudu, but somehow even more intense. Marianne's growth is so emotionally affecting and so well written that I don't even think I have to explain it to you. Does anyone on Earth dislike Marianne? And are they still alive? Have we not killed them yet? There are more popular characters, sure, but even they have their fair share of critics. It's because she's great. Everyone knows that. So we're choosing anarchy today by avoiding redundancy. So here's my top 10 random brainworms about Marianne in no particular order. Number 1. I really like that Marianne's supports bring out the best in her support partners. Usually this is because we see a more sensitive, vulnerable side to her support partners, and we get a direct view on how they feel about topics like personal happiness, fulfillment, duty, the meaning of life, and more. 2. I love how at least 4 people are very flustered by Marianne's natural beauty pre-time skip. It's very cute. 3. I actively boo that Chris Scholar guy in her paralogue every time I play it. Screw that guy. Get out of here! Number 4. YouTuber Soma's Corner makes this really great point that her development rewards the player the more effort you put into recruiting her, getting supports with her and other people, and giving her a chance to be a part of your army. You really feel like Byleth is the one who is able to help Marianne get a support system, and I think that intrinsic reward is part of why people get so personally attached to her. 5. Her voice actress also voices Haru from Persona 5, who, surprise, is my favorite character in that game. So epic. 6. I like how she gets to grow in 2 different ways that's realistic for people who are in her position. Like, we all talk about how she grows into someone with less self-loathing and guilt, but she also reaches a point in the time skip where now that she's in a better place emotionally, she can think about future aspirations. She was too sad to think about that before, but because of that, she's kind of at a loss as to what she should do with her life now that she wants to live. Live for yourself, Marianne. You're worth it. 7. I haven't watched her S support in full, but knowing that she proposes to Byleth first is absolutely everything to me. Number 8. I don't know if I'm saying the numbers consistently, I don't care. She is so adorable and shippable and has so many great options for character endings. Paired endings. Whatever. Number 9. The way her post-time skip design contrasts with her pre-time skip design is so great. It leaves an immediate impression when you first see it. That impression being like, oh my goodness, she's in a better place mentally now. Good for her. Number 10. I love depressed people. Gosh, we've made it to the last ranking. I've been chugging along for a good amount of time here. Over an hour and a half? Yeesh. It's been like a journey on its own. We've talked about dozens of characters. Characters that have fallen. Fallen before me. Foolishly. Characters who, despite having a seemingly meager difference in number ranking, cannot even hope to be in the top spot. Does the suspense kill you? If you truly knew me at all, you'd know the answer to that question. No. I went into this ranking unsure about where every single character would end up landing. Except for the one that I will never be anything but unshakably certain about. Oh God. I can't hold it back anymore. I've restrained myself long enough. I did it for you. So every character you cherish would get their flowers eventually. Even if it's painful to push back the inevitable. No more. No more. Everyone got their flowers. I get mine. They better be Ash Fire Emblem.
I'll prove myself! I can't lose! I got it! I admit I cannot lose! Look out! In the name of justice! I can't lose! I've got you! I will end this now! I cannot lose! Let's finish!
The Ash fandom is dying. Share this video if you're a true Ash hole. Calling Ash just a character I like a lot is not super accurate to my experience. It would be more accurate to say that he's a character that happened to me. I think my brain chemistry is permanently altered, and it's this white boy's fault. I think in the Linhart entry on this list, I mentioned that I'm neurodivergent, and it's really gonna show here. I've had hyperfixations on things for a longer amount of time, but this one outweighs those by just the severe intensity. Legit, I think it's part of why I realized that I might have autism and ADHD 3 years ago. How did it take until 3 years ago to have that thought? I don't know. And for clarity, the special interest is on this guy, not the game, though it is collateral damage. Just Ash Ubert / Ash Duran, depending on the language. Like, look at this. What the hell? Is this hell? Surely, it is worse. Okay, so we're getting a little over the top here. I shouldn't mention hell. Sorry, Mom. Okay, so how did Fire Emblem Three Houses certified little guy make such... So how did Fire Emblem Three Houses certified little guy make such an impression on me? I'll admit, it's kind of a random character. Out of any character from anything ever for my brain to decide is going to be a whole inside-out island in my brain. I'm not gonna pretend I understand the mysteries of how special interests come to be or why. The heart wants what it wants. I will say that my interests at least have to start with some sort of genuine interest, affection, or appreciation of the thing. Checks out for Ash. I was initially interested in him before it spiraled into me looking like this whenever I talk about him. So the question is, why? What caught my attention? I remember when I played Three Houses for the first time. My brother became a really big fan of the game and insisted I get into it as well, which is a decision he regrets now, seeing the animal I've become. And so I gave it a try, reluctantly, because, well, it was the summer of 2020. I was in high school. What else was I supposed to do? I got through the first couple of chapters, not fully hooked on the premise. I still felt kinda obligated to play the game still, but that changed. And it didn't take long. It only took till chapter 3. Did I mention that I played the Blue Lions route first? You might be able to tell. Yeah, that gave this chapter an extra couple punches to the face, and head, and stomach. I didn't expect that we would be dealing with discussions of striking down civilian militia, or seeing a side character be completely shattered by having to strike down his adopted father. Seeing Ash so distraught was the first time this game made me really feel something. I just wanted to hug him so bad. And then he thinks he's bothering us by grieving? Your dad has just died. It is okay, dude. Oh my god. I am so normal. Anyway, that got me to pay extra attention to Ash, and I just found more reasons to like him. I liked how he always does his best with everything he does. I liked how he's so kind to others without it being corny or overbearing. I like how he sympathizes with other people's problems so much that it just starts to upset him. Real. I loved learning about his silly little hobbies and that stupid chuckle he makes all the time. God bless. He was always the favorite and the definition of a comfort character to me. Okay, so I've talked about my personal connection to Ash, but you'd be silly to think that I can't analyze him too. In fact, all cards on the table, I think Ash is one of the most slept-on characters in this game in terms of character discussion, because genuinely, I think there's a lot to talk about, most of which is criminally overlooked. I don't want to get too deep into it because I think an Ash Ubert character analysis, in the same vein of Farghast's ones in terms of scope and runtime, is kind of inevitable at this point. And yes, I could make a 90-minute long video on Ash Ubert. It will happen. Here's the gist though. Ash's character can be defined by two things: his kindness, and his strong sense of justice. Both of these things are well justified in his backstory. He was on the streets. He was only 8 when he had to take on the responsibility of taking care of 2 younger siblings. He gets adopted by a former knight, current kingdom lord, and future dead person, Leonardo Gaspar. Ash gets then attached to knightly ideals because Leonardo was a knight, and those very same books become a bonding experience with Leonardo. Literacy! Yippee! Leonardo is practically a savior to Ash and his siblings. He was willing to take these kids out of a situation that could have easily led to their premature deaths. Because of Leonardo's kindness, Ash internalizes that. Even though he's gone through poverty, and later the execution of his adopted brother, he still desires to put more good in the world than bad. Ash enters the academy geared up on that dream of becoming a knight. Nothing could ever go wrong about this plan ever. Oh, yeah. Hey Ash, guess what time it is? So Leonardo dies, becoming the inciting incident for Ash's character arc. Oh, but Ash is boring, right? How could he possibly have an op- You fool! You doubt me now, after the 7 seals, trumpets, and bowls have passed before you? You fail to see the final judgment is destined to follow? It's here! Don't test the omnipresent power of an autistic wench in her special interest! Sit down, right now! You cannot escape. Oof. As I was saying, Ash is defined by his kindness and strong sense of justice. His kindness manifests in how he tries not to waver on treating people with respect and patience. Unlike so many other characters in this game whose baggage leads them down a bad pattern of behavior, Ash staunchly refuses to do that. He's not just nice, he's kind. There's a difference. He does good things even when it costs him something, even when others do not reciprocate it, and even when he gets absolutely nothing in return. He also has a strong sense of justice. The particular brand of justice he is initially drawn to is inspired by the kingdom's knightly ideals. He has this fantastical, idealized, almost whimsical picture of what seeking justice is, and he thinks he's ready to pursue that. All of that goes out the window when Leonardo dies. Now, he doesn't go crazy or anything, but he's left questioning everything he ever knew about justice. Leonardo was a knight meant to protect his territory, but he's allowing civilian militia to take part in, let's be honest here, a suicide mission that will get his people killed. What happened to the kind father figure he knew? Where does this hatred come from? Ash is stuck picking up the pieces while also dealing with being orphaned. Again. When he finds out the Western Church pushed Leonardo over the edge, he's desperate to understand more. But when he does, it only fractures those knightly ideals further. And that is when Ash finds out that his adopted brother, Kristoff, was a part of an assassination plot to kill Rhea. And even worse, a Knight of Saros, Catherine, was the one to turn him in. At this point, Ash's perception of justice was already being tested. Justice is complicated. It's not a set of ideals that you can easily emulate from knight stories without any second thought. That's what so many other Fargus knights do, and frankly, it's that sort of thing that gets those knights killed. They think they have to die for the sake of fulfilling their role. But here, when he learns the truth he seeks, something else begins to crack. It's his kindness. The kindness that, even right after Leonardo's death, is something that he stubbornly kept choosing. But here, he hates her. Or at least, he thinks he does. Ash needs some time. The war gives him new perspective. It's easy to turn the taking of life into something pretty almost when you only read about it in a book. But out there, it's brutal. Ash is able to understand his father's feelings more. Leonardo died doing something that he thought was just. Who's to say it wasn't? Leonardo lived and died on his set of ideals, and Ash has just got to catch up with his own. But how can he make his justice unique? His own.
I know I can't help very many people right now, but I think doing what I can for those I see in front of me is still worthwhile. I have to believe that, at least.
His kindness, Of course, Ash may be getting into a career that's going to involve the taking of lives eventually, but he refuses to waver in the humanity he gives to all people. He will always be sympathetic, patient, and even forgiving, because at the end of the day, what else can he do? He's just one guy. Sure, he can't change the world himself, but that doesn't mean he can't jump on an opportunity to be kind when it's right in front of him. There's also another point about this. Lonato, he died because he couldn't let go of his hatred. A once kind man turned bitter until it made him an easy target to manipulate. Though Ash may have conflicting feelings about someone like Catherine, he knows he can't make the same mistakes his father did. He'll meet the same end if he does. He can respect Lonato's choices, but he can't repeat all of them. And so, he lives on, doing his best. It's gonna be alright, Heir of Justice. Ash is my favorite fictional character, period, right now. It's not even close. I could yap about him more, and I'm already exercising a lot of restraint to not do that, but I hope above all else, you understand the passion I got for the guy. A full-lengthy analysis would be fun. Might happen either way, but I'd be happy to hear if other people are interested in that sort of thing, even if it's simply morbid curiosity. If that's you, please tell me. It'll fuel my motivation even more. Somehow, even after making a video such as this, I'm still refining my perspectives on characters and finding new things to say about them. Part of that is thanks to this fan base, which still remains passionate 6 whole years later. I've met so many cool people through this shared love of the game, and I hope I keep continuing to do so. I've actually linked a whole playlist in the description of Three Houses video essays that I've thoroughly enjoyed over the years because I want to say thank you in some sort of way. Fire Emblem Three Houses is incredibly special to me. It's a game that I was introduced to during the period of quarantine that was the most isolating for me personally. This game genuinely changed me. I've become a better artist, writer, and even a better person because of this game. Because that's what the power of art that truly speaks to me does. Its world building is the kind I get lost in, its story complex with themes that keep me thinking for hours, and characters, of course, that I will have a soft spot in my heart for forever. This game has so much to say if you let it whisk you away to those peaceful days once again.
you.